Hello, this is Chris Cooper, and a big welcome to the Business Elevation Show on Voice America. It's great to be back with you yet again. We've got another fantastic guest with you today. We've got Simon Bowen, and incredibly, Simon is up. It's now 11:04 p.m. in Perth, in Australia, and he's up and he's still coherent, which is pretty amazing on a Friday evening. So, very impressed with Simon already. Before we get started, this show brings to you wise, exceptional people around the globe who are often come from a business background, but not necessarily, but bring a real wisdom and really care about contributing to a better world through their work, because we believe that good matters. So this is episode, I think, 642 or 3, something like that. Today we're one of the longest running business podcasts in the world. So delighted to go to Australia for today's edition. On last week's show, we had Bennett Borden, and Bennett is an absolute world-leading expert when it comes to AI. And we had an absolutely fascinating conversation. In fact, Bennett also appeared live as a guest on an event for a community I host called the Elevation Collective, which focus on amplifying good around the world. And AI is something that we really have to work with and understand today. So there might be a little mention of that because Simon's got a lot of experience around AI. But if you're interested in finding out more about the AI and the ethics of it and how it's changing the world and the reason why you all should be taking serious note of AI, if you're not right now, then please go into the archive. Do check out that interview with Bennett last week. There's been a lot of very positive feedback on that. So let's talk about Simon and about today's show. We're going to talk about thinking systems for good. And Simon's a real master when it comes to thinking systems. He's created something called the Models Method, which I know is utilised a lot around the world. He does to help his clients. And if the greatest untapped asset in your organisation actually isn't the technology, your products, or even your people, Simon would say it's actually the way that you think. So today, Simon joins us from Perth. He's the founder of the Models Method. He's a globally respected strategist. He spent decades with organisations unlocking what he calls their company genius and the hidden thinking that drives success. He's worked with businesses, governments, research institutions, and today really operates through this thinking system. And he's going to share a little bit with us today about some powerful visual models that he works with to transform leadership and decision making and increase influence. We'll also take a little bit of time to find out about his fascinating journey from rural Australia. He also has a big passion for rock music, as I do as well, and we found ourselves as mutual fans of AC/DC. I did speak to someone the other day who actually hadn't heard of them, which I found quite astonishing. I'm sure Simon would as well. We'll talk a little bit about that. But what I really want to do today is just explore better thinking and how it can lead businesses to a better world and a better way of operating. So Simon, welcome from Perth in Australia.
Yeah,
What's Perth like as a city?
Perth's gorgeous. People keep saying you should move to North America. About 80% of our clients from North America. You should move to North America. And my response is, have you been to Perth? Everyone in Perth lives within 30 minutes of the beach. There's no rain for 8 months of the year. It's just sunny and nice, and then we get all our rain in winter, and it's cool and crisp, but not ridiculously cold. So it's a little slice of heaven on the west coast of Australia. Down the bottom, it's gorgeous. Not busy. Why would you live anywhere else?
Yeah. Maybe so you don't have to do podcasts at 11 p.m. at night. But
Well, you do have most of your calls with your clients at 5 a.m. in the morning, or podcasts at 11 o'clock at night. But we all have a currency that we trade in to do the thing that we do in the world, right? Everything has a currency, and that's mine, is the odd hours that I'm on Zoom.
I think it's probably well worth it. So what's it like growing up in rural Australia?
Look, Australia is a country of about 26 million people. Western Australia is half the country by land mass, but only 10% of the population.
Yeah.
And so, 2 million people live in Perth and about 600,000 people live in the country. So there's a very small number of people in a big area. And that's where I lived, out in in country Western Australia. So small towns are like 400 people and 900 people. They're either wheat and they're either farming or mining. So we were in the central wheat belt. And the thing about small country towns, there's no doubt that my view of the world is shaped by growing up in that environment. Small country towns, they survive entirely on the basis of the community. At least one farmer is going to lose their crop every year to fire.
Yeah.
And so everyone is a member of the volunteer fire brigade. And when there's a fire, everyone goes out and fights. The siren goes off and everybody just leaves their workplace and go out to fight the fire, because it could be somebody else's crop the next time. And there's two paychecks, when the crop comes in and when the wool clip comes in. So if someone loses their crop, the community just looks after them. In one of the towns that I grew up in, there was only one general store and one petrol station. Mm. If the general store closes, the town dies. If the petrol station closes, the town dies. And I just understood, I think, at a young age, that every community has certain things that are needed that are needed, necessary pillars of community, and business is one of them. So I'd go down to Hills, the store, and I'd get something for Mum, and he'd say, "Good, you're a good lad, walking down and getting it." And he'd give me some lollies or something, and then I'd walk home, and we had an account. I didn't give him any money; just every month he sent Mum the bill, and she settled it. And that was country life. Everybody knew everybody. If you got up to mischief, everybody also knew that. But you were given lessons as opposed to punishment. And I just think that's shaped the way I view the world. I think business is one of the most powerful forces we've got on the planet. And I'm sure it comes from, seeing how important the local businesses are to very small communities in country Western Australia. It was a rich, rich childhood that I am very grateful that I had the opportunity to enjoy. I would have had a very different experience living in the city, and you can take the boy out of the country, but you never really do take the country out of the boy. It's true. It's true.
I have a memory that sticks in my mind of walking into a travel agent's in Alice Springs, and there was a very attractive young lady who was working on the side, and we got talking, and she said, "Do you know, I've never even seen the sea." And I said, "Really?" I said, are you ever going to, leave Alice Springs and go to the seaside? She said, "Oh no, I couldn't leave here."
No. No, well, Alice Springs would be as far from the sea in any direction you could possibly imagine.
Probably in the world. Nearly. Yeah. Well, not quite, but
yeah. But that happens a lot. Chris, with people in the country, the closer the towns are to the city, the more likely it is that the young people will make their way to the city when they leave school, and I just want to go to the city. But when the towns are a long way out in central Australia, or in the sheep station areas and things like that, you do tend to find that the young people have a life there that they don't want to leave, because it is it's just a pretty great way to live. I'm sure it's changing. I haven't lived in the country for decades, but I'm sure, like everything, it's changing. But it was such strong community. Everyone knew everybody. You just knew everyone.
Yeah,
and that's pretty hard to replace.
Yeah. And are you impacted by climate change significantly these days from when you were?
Well, I've just read an article. Well, for years ago, a long time ago, probably 15 or 20 years ago, one of the things that was being spoken about at the time was a hole in the ozone layer, sitting over the top of Australia. We have quite intense sun. Like, I travel the world a lot, And, there are places that our summertime temperature in Perth is 40 degrees, so about 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Um, and I've been to other places that have those similar sort of temperatures, but the intensity of the sun here is quite high. And one of the arguments was because of the hole in the ozone layer. There's some more debate going on about that now. It might have healed itself. So does that mean we've taken enough action that started to heal itself? And of course, the worry is, do we risk actually going back again and doing some damage? We've definitely had salination problems of rural land where high salt content is starting to come through because of trees being chopped down and things like that, and that's affecting the ability to grow crops and so on. We don't have the same level of smog and those sorts of things that you might see in very populated places. I mean, put in context, if you chop off Alaska, we're the same size as the US, but 26 million people, not 340 million. So we don't have the same volume. But the rains are getting later. Farmers will say the rain used to come in, July, and we'd put the crop in, and now it hasn't. It's not coming till August, and sometimes it doesn't come at all. We're dry seeding. Wind patterns are changing. We just had the biggest storm in 5 years in Perth a couple of weeks ago, like a mini cyclone. We never get cyclones this far down the coast. So, is that all climate change, or is it a part of the 100-year weather cycle? I don't know the answer to that, but I feel like we are certainly feeling the impact of changing climatic conditions. I went to Antarctica about 18 months ago, and it is beautiful and pristine. It is actually one of the most amazing places. And what is incredible, like you think, the ice and the land mass and the whales and the penguins and the massive birds are all amazing. And you wake up and there's an iceberg right outside the window of your room on the ship and everything else. And despite all of that, the most incredible thing was the quality of the light.
Yes.
Because the sky is absolutely clear. And then you compare that when you come back and you think, oh, okay, there's something going on.
Yeah. So just
but it is degrading. There's no doubt that the ice is disappearing, and the wildlife is being affected. So I'm not a climate scientist, but I err on the side of the majority of the scientific view that and we can't deny the plastics in motion. So it's yeah. But I think we're feeling it here for sure.
Yeah. So we better move on and talk about thinking. So from that small rural town that you grew up in, how did you
Yes.
end up doing what you're doing today? If you can just tell us in a nutshell, and then we'll go into that.
The nutshell, covering a pretty eclectic work life. I started my working life in electrics and electronics, and actually designing componentry and diagnosing. And if you design an electrical or electronic component, you can think it up in your head, but before it becomes the actual thing in reality, it's a drawing on paper first. And so my early working life, even growing up in the country, if I had to, ride a motorbike between two of my uncle's farms and I wasn't sure which way I was going, they'd draw it in the ground, with a stick and say, this is where you've got to go. Everything was a drawing, right? Everything was between the thought and the reality is a drawing on paper. And in fact, everything that you and I are using right now, every bit of technology, started its existence in the real world. The metaphysics, it started its existence in the real world as a drawing on CAD or on paper. You would not go to a builder and go, hey, I've got a great idea for a house, build it for me. The builder would go, I need some drawings. I need some architectural plans. And so that was where I started my working life. Then I had a bizarre, sidestep thinking I'd be a teacher until I met teenagers in high school and knew that I actually did not have the vocational fortitude to do that. I need to work with adults. I lectured at university, and then post-secondary in Australia, TAFE, the equivalent of Polytechnic. And then I did a lot of change management work in organisations, and was eventually an executive manager for one of Australia's largest companies, running the sales division and a number of manufacturing facilities in Western Australia. And the thread all the way through that, was, I think about things pretty deeply anyway, always have. But, the quality of an outcome has everything to do with the quality of the thinking in the first place. A business is only as good as the idea on which it's built and the quality of thinking that drives it. And if the quality of thinking is flawed, I think of thinking. So I coined this term company genius, and I can talk about that a bit later on. But company genius is the underlying thinking the company has about how it solves the problems or creates the opportunities that it does. And I can walk through the pattern of that. But if you think of that underlying thinking as the source code of a company, if the source code of a bit of software is flawed, if it's got a mistake, if it's got an error, and you layer all the other bits on top, the interface and the various modules and packages, at some point the error in the source code will come to the surface. And there's been some massive consequences, rockets blowing up and things like that, because the source code had a flaw that sat there for years until people saw it. That's true for thinking. I think the other thing that I'd probably point out about that is the number one requirement for any business, any not-for-profit, any research organization is relevance. That, a species only dies or becomes extinct when it fails to be relevant to the environment. And if you fail to be relevant over time, you can't quickly catch up. You usually just get wiped out. And business is like that. If you fail to stay relevant, if you don't keep adapting to the environment you're operating in, eventually you'll become extinct. Now, in business, in nature, relevance is adaptation. In business, relevance is having this clear contextual and conceptual awareness of the marketplace and what it is that people will pay you money for, and repeatedly. And so relevance is the number one strategic objective in most companies, so you can survive and thrive. And that's a function of thinking. How good is the thinking that you bring to the table in the market you're operating in? Yeah. Can you outsell and outserve the competition?
Is that a basic human need, though, as well, potentially relevance?
Oh, absolutely. It's people attach their identity to how they believe the world sees them, right? And so I probably you, and I think probably most people want to feel like the world would see them as relevant, right? In the context of what they do. And it's interesting. We've had about 10 years now the idea of start with why, and purpose and everything else. And you and I have had a chat about the endless vision and mission workshops companies sometimes have, where everyone gets in a room and they try to wordsmith the vision and mission.
I've delivered them myself with companies.
So have I, right? And they're really the hunt for relevance, right? And start with why and find your purpose. But the reality is there's a universal purpose for companies, at least in the commercial world. And the universal purpose, it's the same one for every company. The customer wants to know that your number one purpose is to serve me and solve the problem or resolve the opportunity that I'm trying to tackle. Like, I'm your only purpose. I should be your only purpose, right? Your relevance is attached to helping me get my thing sorted out, right? And as soon as the customer knows that that is true, the very next question they're going to ask is, well, how would you do that? And you better have a way of explaining the underlying thinking, the company genius, the source code behind how you solve complex problems that the customers have.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty It's a multi-layered thing.
Yeah, yeah, how relevant is this when people have AI now as a thinking system?
Hmm. Well, AI, I'm yeah, AI without question is the most amazing technological advancement in my lifetime, without question. I mean, the internet was pretty cool. Isn't
Yeah,
it fascinating? Nowadays we go, well, the internet was cool. It was
yeah,
way more than cool when it came out, right? But
yeah,
oh yeah, the internet was cool, right? Robotics were all right. Remember when electric cars came out, and wow, and then AI hit. AI had a much longer tail than November 2022 when ChatGPT came out. So, it was around much, much longer than that. But I would draw it, but I'll just do it with my hands in front of the camera. If you imagine technology as a line, right? Now, the stirrup was technology when it came in, and the stirrup allowed, I think it was the Mongols. The stirrup was the number one number one weapon in war, because it enabled the riders to ride without holding the reins, and they could fire arrows from the horseback instead of riding one-handed and swinging, a sword or a lance. The stirrup was amazing technology. Of course, the wheel was amazing technology. The steam engine turned industrialization on its head. Every one of these technologies is a line, and technology lines start down low, typically at things that involve labor, and then the line slowly climbs and consumes everything that falls below it as it goes, right? So, if we think about AI content, you might consider content is at the bottom. So, processing forms, answering phones. Content was consumed pretty rapidly. Constructs, organizing the structures of things, concepts have pretty much been consumed by AI now. Context is not entirely consumed, but we're moving there. We're getting there, right? But the question is, what is above the AI line that still belongs to humans? And there's a bunch of stuff.
yeah,
Compassion, conscience, care, concern. There's a difference between the expert that knows, because you could argue that AI is an expert that knows versus an expert that actually cares.
yep,
And there's a few interesting things. It might be true that one of the most uniquely human things that we might have to reconnect to and be grateful for is that we make mistakes. Because some of our greatest discoveries, like penicillin, came from mistakes. And the brain is exercised through trial and error and mistakes. And so, if humans stop experimenting and stop testing and pushing and prodding, that might land us in a pretty poor place. The other thing that I've been thinking about, recently, is that someone who serves certain customers in a certain type of thing, let's say a service, right? Experts who really understand their world. So I think there's three components to company genius, and one of them is what you create. It's your lens of perspective, right? And so it's your ability to make sense of the person, the customer, make sense of their circumstance, make sense of the world that's existing in, and make sense of the future they're trying to get to, and hold all of that in one frame, multidimensionally at one time. Now, an expert can do that, right? But the other thing an expert can do, because they deal with these people all the time, is anticipate unpredictable human behavior. Because most people are illogical when they're trying to solve something they're wrestling with. You and I have done a lot of work with organizations. We've spoken about leadership. I don't know about you, but I've had many times when I've been working with a company doing certain things, and then a senior leader might say to me, we need to get buy-in with my team. Could you come and get my team to buy into this thing? And in my brain, I'm going, well, you're the leader, actually. So, but you know what? I've been asked that question before. I was waiting for it. I can anticipate that, and I know how to do that for you, right? So one of the things that we still have that we own is the ability to anticipate unpredictable, maybe even illogical human behavior. But people, first and foremost, want to be made safe. And people still believe that they need to turn to a human to be made safe.
Right.
Who's got my back? So that, I think AI, is it the greatest existential threat to mankind? That's a whole other conversation we don't need to get into today. What's the ethic of AI and the companies that are building the models and everything else? Different conversation. Is it a great tool? It's amazing. Is there the risk that it could create cognitive decline and cognitive laziness? I'm sure it actually already is. If people just use it and don't think. That's why thinking is so important. If you stop thinking, you lose the muscle. But is there still plenty of places for humans to play? Absolutely. And really important places.
Yeah. I was hearing last week some suggestion and evidence starting to come through that actually the act of utilizing AI is to ask questions that we've actually not asked before is also adding to our cognitive development. So we there's quite a lot saying, is it doing all for us? But I don't know about you. When I utilize it, I'm interacting with it all the time. I'm thinking, it's thinking, I'm thinking, it's thinking, and I probably find the conversations go deeper sometimes around strategy and things that they wouldn't do on my own or with someone else. So I think there's something in, there might be some benefits in there too, potentially.
If you're a thinker, Chris, if you understand thinking as a system, right?
Yes.
There is some indication that the people that use AI to build, so people that use AI to code, design and build, as opposed to AI to write content and documents and things like that, are elevating their thinking ability around that because they're spending less time in lines of code
Yes.
and more time at the conceptual and contextual level interacting.
Yes.
But there's also very clear evidence that company executives that use AI now to write all of their emails within a matter of weeks have lost the ability to write an email.
Yeah.
Which is so, I think it's a double-edged sword, but it's not going away. And we have to figure out how to make the greatest use of it in the best way for humankind in reality, and I'm not sure that I'm as concerned as a lot of the commentary about the loss of jobs. The technology line, whatever the technology is, keeps climbing, and what tends to happen is people start doing work at a slightly higher level. It is a problem for at the lower levels of those of work and things like that, but humans are driven to invent. And so if we didn't invent AI, we would invent something else. We have a curiosity to invent. And, I think it's a part of the DNA of the human being. So we're going to keep inventing technology. We have to learn to be great at, living with it and operating with it.
Yeah, fantastic. We're going to have to go to commercial break in a moment. You just make me think I've had conversations with 3 different young people over the last week, and what I've suggested to them is that I would worry less about AI taking your job, but it's more likely somebody who understands AI who's going to take your job.
Yes.
So start working with it and understand it. And that it will become a competence and a strength, and that will actually make you increase your ability to be hired.
Well, I think that's a great observation. It's easy to become a bit obsessed with worrying about who can take things off you, as opposed to focusing on how you can equip yourself to be making the greatest contribution that someone could make. If you're somebody that just seems to find a way to contribute no matter what, you're generally okay. But, if you're focused on how do I stop something or someone taking things off me, your focus tends to go to where you spend most of your thinking time, right? As opposed to how can I make a big difference?
Yeah.
And just that question, how do I make a bigger difference, opens your mind up to other things. It's simple to say, I get it. People are very, very worried, but This is going to challenge people to think about how they approach the world.
Absolutely. So we're going to have a commercial break now. Just be a couple of minutes tops, and we'll be back with you after the break. We'll talk a little bit about Company Genius, and we'll also talk about some of the models that Simon uses to help people solve problems and make better decisions. So we'll be back with you again in just a couple of minutes. Do join us after the break. And if you've got sitting there somewhere quietly listening to this, maybe take a pad out, piece of paper or electronic notepad. If you've got any golden nuggets that you hear from this that you could then utilize, do make a few notes and then go away and act upon something. We're back again with you in just a couple of minutes. This is Chris Cooper. I'm with Simon Bowen, and we've been talking about thinking. Actually, we've been talking about AI. We've been talking about Simon's background as well. But Simon, tell us a little bit about the idea of company genius. What's it mean?
Yeah, it's I first really the idea emerged for me when I was doing some work with a gold mine on an island off the northeast coast of Papua New Guinea, where the majority of the workforce don't really speak or read English. They speak pidgin English. And we're trying to get them to work safely together. And the mine is inside an old volcano that still has a lot of thermonuclear gas rising up and liquid oxygen plants on the island that are wildly dangerous and everything else. And how do we get them all to operate inside a safety system? And I recognized that I needed a way of articulating this. And I started leaning into chaos theory, the self-organizing system, and started to build a model around that. What I recognized was that most companies don't actually codify how they think, right? So when you think about how does a company emerge, how does a company start, it usually starts with a founder who had a base of knowledge, a base of thinking, maybe even a base of wisdom. They saw a need that they knew how to fill, right? And so they created that. It was an original perspective that they brought to the table. They really understood the customer, they understood the market, they understood the issue, and they could bring it to market. And as the company grows, other people add to that thinking. And so now it's not just the thinking of one person, it's the thinking of multiple people. And then they're adding to it things that many other companies also do. But because of that original thinking, they do those other things better. So they created original thinking and then they curated best in breed solutions, right? But it only comes together when you integrate it all. And it's that integrated system of thinking that I call company genius. So if you think about it, a company has a company has a purpose. And, if you put purpose at the top of the page and you think of that as vision, mission, or whatever, and you go right to the bottom of the page and you write the word impact, this is the impact a company has in the marketplace with its clients. We can divide that page into three segments. Down the right-hand side, we bring that purpose to market through the mechanics of the business. And, this is how the business structures and organizes itself. So organizational structures, procedures, policies, practices, and so on. And we document those. We call them standard operating procedures. We create process flow charts and everything else. And the mechanics of the company create consistency. This company is consistent in how it performs each time, and therefore the customer says we can rely on them. Down the left-hand side is the magic of the company, and that's the people. And the magic is really the culture, and I have a model for culture, which I'm drawing on the screen at the moment, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But culture creates the character of an organization. Culture is not the outcome. Culture itself is not the outcome. It's the pathway to character. And when people say that company has character, we can trust them. So we can trust them because they have character. We can rely on them because they're consistent. But I kept seeing this gap from vision and mission down to impact and outcome. And the gap that I kept seeing was what I now call company genius. And I built a model that I call the company genius model that can codify the entire thinking behind what a company does in a model that takes about 7 minutes to explain. The genius model. So if you build warships, I can build a model that allows you to explain that in 7 minutes. If you're a technology company, I can build a model that describes the design thinking that sits behind the technology before the technology was built. You know, as soon as you can describe your design thinking behind what you do, that's when the customer goes, well, that actually makes sense, and they feel safer because of it, right? And so this is the model of thinking that the company uses, the genius model, company genius, and the customer says, oh, they're capable. It's not product and service. It's not product specification. They're good thinkers. They're capable. And therefore we can believe them. And we do live in a believability crisis. What's real anymore? You know, before the episode, we were talking about what about videos that aren't even real anymore. And so because they're capable, because I can now see their thinking, I can see the model of their thinking, I can believe them. They have character. I can trust them. They're consistent. I can rely on them. So I want to go and do business with that company. Now, we capture culture in value statements, vision and mission statements, and documents we write about, you know, the ideal organizational behaviors and things like that. We capture the mechanics in SOPs and organizational org charts and process maps. But I realized that there was no system or method for codifying the thinking of the company that sits behind everything that it does. And so I decided to codify it into a single visual model that everyone could understand. And it started to act as the source code for companies. What does it do? All of a sudden, it aligns everyone inside the business. Now you're not just saying, what's our vision, mission, and values? You're saying, can you describe our genius model? Can you walk through our genius model? We have clients that hire new people, like, say, a new chief operating officer, and this turns into a manifesto. And imagine you hand them a manifesto that describes the genius model of the company for their onboarding, and you say, just study that, and then come back to us in 2 days' time and give us a 15-minute presentation about how we think. How much alignment do you get out of that in that amount of time, right? I built it as an internal tool. And then as we used it year after year, clients started using it as a sales tool to get in front of the customer and go, well, you want us to build a warship? Here's how we think about that. 7 minutes later, someone's saying, how come no one else has explained that simply for us before? And that's when you sit on the edge of multi-million-dollar and billion-dollar deals, when people say, you clearly have a different level of thinking than everybody else. And it's, what have we created? What's the original perspective we've created? What's the best practice we've curated from around the world, and how have we integrated into a single cohesive framework that delivers the outcome over and over again? And that becomes the source code of the business. So it's this central thread from vision and mission to impact.
That's beautifully explained. And what you've done there is, because I can see, some of you listening by audio can't see it, but Simon has drawn this pictorially, and it makes makes a huge amount of sense. I'm thinking at the moment of a company I work with, and I've worked with them around culture for a number of years, and they now have a culture level of on a Barrett cultural score of 93% versus an industry average of 55, and a company average across thousands of companies done it at 54. So we've got a long way there. Everything is very clearly documented in terms of organisation charts, and there's policies and things. But you got me wondering. I don't know. Think their thinking has been really thought through, and so I see that gap down the middle. It's
Yeah, we've not yet met the company that does have that documented. In terms of clients we've started working with. I mean, we usually kind of go in and try and see what they've got, but it's assumed, Chris. It's assumed, but if you think about this, if the original thinkers, the founders, start to step back from the business, you start to dilute the thinking. Now, when you dilute company genius, the company just starts to commoditize like everybody else. In the marketing world, the surface level renderings of a company, your website, social media, messaging, etc., they're all actually renderings of how you think.
yeah.
But if you've never codified how you think, those things start to dilute. Imagine AI. Imagine if you've got a new sales leader and very proficient with AI, and they jump into AI and start to create messages, and they've come to your company thinking, yeah, look, their messaging is not that good. I'm going to sort this out because I'm a very, very successful sales leader, and they're using AI and tools and everything else. They come to your company viewing you as being very similar to every other company in your space. They just need to find the angles, right? And they're looking at the surface level to find the angles, as opposed to, here's the underlying model of how we think.
Yeah.
And it's original to us. Now, when you build a genius model and you put that into AI, you get very different thinking out of the large language model than you do without it.
Yes.
Because the large language model looks at this and goes, oh, I can see what you're talking about.
That's
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you are the sense maker of the market.
Yeah, and that's the guideline for AI to be able to advise you and aligned with your genius. So looking at that genius code, then a company genius, what sort of things might appear within somebody's company code?
Well,
the components that might make up that.
So the model,
ability.
So many companies design their solution. If people imagine, a flow chart with boxes and arrows running from left to right, and all the boxes are blue for those that can't see this, so many companies describe what they do as, here's our process, right? And often it's just activity, right? And then they pop the customer onto the end with a different colored box and say, that's you. And so our process delivers this to you. But life is not linear, and neither are humans. And so what the model does is allow you to dip in and out of the model at different places, depending on what's going on. And the middle of the model, the $1 million promise in the middle, we call it, and then the 3 critical outcomes around it, are effectively the heart of the model. What we've done is put the customer right in the middle of the thinking that the company brings to the market. And so that's the context. Now, interestingly, in sales particularly, but often in leadership, context is the first thing that people allow to leave the conversation. Yet context gives everything meaning. If I show you a photo of 3 photos of a man with a crew cut from the back, so you can't see their face or anything, but they've got a crew cut, and you say, what's the context? Someone might say he's a skinhead. Someone might say he's a Marine or a veteran. Someone might say he's a cancer survivor. Same photo, the context gives it meaning, right? And so the customer is always the context. And at the center of the model is what I call the ache. The ache, This is different to pain-based marketing. I'm not a fan of find the pain, aggravate it, and then solve. I'm not a fan of that sort of marketing. I'm a big believer in buyer safety. The customer should feel safer with you at every step of the marketing and sales process than they would with anyone else. And they have an ache that they can't describe. We travel a lot, and when I come home, I might have been lifting suitcases on and off, and I go to my physiotherapist, who I normally do some Pilates work with, and I go, you know what, I'm just aching. I want a massage today. And he goes, well, where's the ache? I'm going, it's all over. It's just everywhere. And what does it feel like? Oh, it's just an ache. Yeah. And he pokes a muscle in my back, and a bit of pain shoots through. And I go, what was that? And he goes, oh, it's the blah, blah, blah muscle. It's always that one. The ache is this thing that someone can't really describe. I know one of the aches that a lot of our clients have is, I'm just sick of having to prove myself every time I walk into a room. That's actually an ache. I know what we do is unbelievably good. Our customers get so much from it. The feedback is extraordinary. We know it works. I'm just sick of having to prove myself every time I submit a proposal or walk into a room. The problem is your source code's not visible. That's why you have to prove yourself, because you're proving yourself at the surface level. They're not seeing your thinking, right? But the ache then has problems sitting above that, those three things around the outside of it. So, the middle of the model is you've got to find that thing that the customer can't name, can't point to, but as soon as you can vocalize it, you've just made more sense than anyone else they've spoken to in the market. And then the model talks about what are the levers we pull to drive the center of the model, and then the capabilities specifically that we bring to the table. And then there's a side of this that I haven't really talked about, which is the model's got about 7 levels in it that we work through to really pull this out, 7 levels of thinking. But then I studied stage magic and comedy, because the two most powerful forms of performing art to trigger curiosity. And if you're a leader trying to get your team engaged, or you're a salesperson trying to get a customer engaged, there's not a more powerful emotional state that you could trigger than curiosity. And so the two art forms that really trigger that are stage magic and comedy, and they have the same pattern. It's a setup, and then at the punchline of the reveal, it collapses the paradigm rapidly and puts a new paradigm in place. There's a structure to it. And so I created what I call the choreography of how you walk through any visual model. So the model on paper is one thing, but the model actually creates the conversation through the choreography. And people, the ego is no longer attached to you. The ego is attached to the model. And you're just taking people through the model. And it's like going into a change rooms at the shop and trying on some clothes before you actually buy them. They get to fall into the model and try it on, because you've turned the model into a piece of performing art that they can come on the journey with. They're looking at the model side by side with you, rather than having a conversation with you face to face, which is a more combative posture, if you like. So the model contains context in the middle. So context is always held in frame. I mean, a suggestion that I'd be making to people who sell a complex product or service, think about what context is and do everything you can to keep it in front of the customer all the way through the sale. Don't ever let context leave the sale. Yet 90% of the time, people let context leave the sale. They get down to content and capability and specifications, and context is gone. Now you're just like everybody else. The customer's job is to get a better price. They're not being horrible. That's their job. That's what everybody does when they're customers. They want to get a better price. It's the salesperson's job to defend value. And we often sell the way we buy. And so the customer's trying to get a better deal, and we're thinking, oh, I get that. No, it's the salesperson's job to defend value. And you defend value by keeping context in the conversation all the time. Now, why were we doing this again? Oh, because of such and such. If I talk about a model, one of my favorite models, which
we've got 3 minutes till close, just to let you know.
Yeah, perfect. So I might say to you, here we are right now, Chris, into the future, do you want to buy this thing? And you go, for sure. Well, the reality is the future is really predictable. You're either going to be in a green future or a red future. The red future is a red line heading down. The green line, the green future is a green line heading up. Red line is a function of drift. Green line is a function of great decisions. I know how to put you on the green line and keep you there and protect you from the red line so you don't get exposed to that. Do you want to have a conversation about how we would do that? Because my model that I built is the answer to putting you on the green line and keeping you there. So would you like to have a conversation about what the model looks like? There's no way you're going to walk away from this conversation now because I've just put context in there.
Yes.
Super powerful.
Yes. And it's not a dead loss of money. It's actually got a potentially a significant return or a risk if you don't invest it.
Well, because the gap just keeps getting bigger as time goes on. So I only had 3 minutes and I shortened the choreography. The deeper choreography
I like
just really makes the sale. Yeah.
I like it.
Interesting.
Hey, it's been a fantastic conversation. I think, and I love the way that you've articulated this. I think it's great. If there's something that our listeners should, think about to do this week to improve their thinking, what would you encourage them to do?
Yeah, go analog.
God,
humans are still analog beings, right? We have shades of grey, and we're analog creatures trying to live in a digital world. And so if you really, really want to think deeply about something, honestly, get marker pens and paper and start drawing boxes and circles and flowcharts and diagrams, and they won't be perfect, but start thinking through the problems you're trying to resolve visually, in sequences and in shapes and little 2x2 matrices and triangles, and draw a triangle and put the thing in the middle. And that means you've only got 3 things you can choose that are going to affect that. So now you've got to make the discernment. What are the most important 3? The geometry is an art form, but if you want to improve your thinking, go analog. Don't just automatically sit at the keyboard and start thinking over the keyboard. Draw and write, and we're still analog creatures trying to live in a digital world.
It's really valuable. I had a guest a number of years ago on the show, and he explained Obamacare in pictures. Online, and he got a call from the White House. Please, can you come and explain Obamacare in pictures to us, because we like what you've done, and people are taking note of it. So I completely that's another example, but that's really, really helpful because it's so easy to lose that, isn't it, now in the technology and AI, not using pictures and.
Well, let me leave one last thought. Imagination is still one of the human domains, and imagination is based on image. The human brain is a picture making machine, not a word making machine. And so the more you allow it to operate through imagery, the more powerful the thinking becomes.
Well, Simon, thank you very much. Marker pens are coming out over the weekend. It's been absolutely absolutely brilliant, and thank you again for joining us at a very late hour in Perth. If you want to find out more about the work of Simon Bowen and his team, and Simon works all over the globe with this model. It's not something he just developed for our benefit. It's really well proven. Modelsmethod.com, do check that out. I think there's a huge amount of sense in really understanding your company genius and being able to articulate that and find the ways to do that to help your clients understand the enormous value that you add. And as we're interested in here on this show about doing good, I think whatever this idea of visually drawing and using marker pens and thinking about your visions and perspectives and what your genius is can help you, I believe, enormously to ultimately contribute in a bigger way to improving the world. So thank you for everything you do, Simon. On next week's show, we have Judy Robinette, who's one of the most connected people I know. We're great friends. She's an angel investor. She's also an incredible thinker and an expert on networking, connecting with people around the globe. So we'll have Judy, who's a great wise counsel, joining us next week. In the meantime, Simon, enjoy Australia, enjoy a little bit of AC/DC, but probably not before you go to bed. We didn't get a chance to talk about that. Maybe next time.
No, we didn't. I live 100 meters from the highway to hell. But they wrote the song. So
we can talk about
I'll think about that when I go to sleep tonight. Thank you very much for having me as a guest. It's been fantastic.
You're welcome. Take care, everybody. And if you want more, if you want to connect with anything, got suggestions for incredible guests, you've got any thoughts that you want me to know about this show, chriscooper.co.uk. Take care, everybody.